Okay, so this week we are deep in the details. We have arrived at the detail heavy section of the Torah. We arrived there last week with Parsha Truma, and I always feel like there's a real transition when we get to Parsha Truma in the reading that the Torah is asking of us. Now, when we get to Parshat, okay, so there's Genesis, and Genesis is just a joy to read, right? Like that's just it's just great storytelling. And then the same with Exodus. We continue with Exodus, with half of Exodus. And then I always say when we get to Parshat Mishpatim, after the Revelation of Mount Sinai, the Revelation of Mount Sinai is like the last bit of sort of uninterrupted narrative. And then when we get to Parshat Mishpatim, things start to get a little dense. And Mishpatim means laws, and so that's what we get. We get a dense catalog of laws. And that is an adjustment. And I always think it's a challenge because, stories are so joyous and easy to read. And then to transition into law is requires us to be reading more carefully and precisely and less taken along by the narrative. Okay, so that's a transition. And that's Parshat Mishpatim. But the truth is, it is the next Parsha, Parshat Truma, where the challenge to the reader really becomes severe, I think, because Parshat Truma begins to detail the construction of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle. And it's very detail heavy. I mean, we say this every single year. We get to it, and I can't tell you how many B'nai Mitzvah students I've had who described who happened to land Parshat Truma, who described it as, this has become almost like the classic reference point, an IKEA instruction manual. That's like what everybody says, and it's true. Any of us who have seen that stuff, that's what it feels like. And the point of the reference is to say nobody wants to read an IKEA instruction manual, and so there's a challenge now. It's our most sacred book, and we rise to the challenge, and of course we find interesting things to say about even the most granular details in the Torah. In some ways, that is the lesson, is that anything can be fascinating if we pay close enough attention. But having said all that, we are certainly in the detail-heavy section of the Torah. We started that last week, and this week it continues with more details, maybe more interesting if you are a fashion person, because here the details have to do with embroidery and stitching rather than construction. We are detailing the garments of the high priest. So we have a tabernacle, and then we have someone who's going to work in the tabernacle. All these things are being mapped out, but it's still very, very detail heavy. And aside from the flourish of colors, it again presents the reader with a challenge. It's not such page turning reading. And yet, for all of that, someone once claimed that the most important line in the entire Torah is in this week's Parsha. Oh, okay. So I'll leave you to speculate a little bit what that is. But the real question is, how could that be? What verse is hanging around these instruction manual style chapters that might be claimed as the most important, the most central line in the Torah? Okay, so let's take a look, and we'll get started. But we're going to take some time now to look at a very classic but very strange debate that I always think of when I get to this week's Parsha. The truth is, I think of it when I get to Parshat Kedoshim, because the debate really begins really begins more famously in response to a much more celebrated verse, and we'll see that as well. So let's take a blessing here, and we'll get into our debate for today. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Okay, so that blessing is for those of us who haven't had a chance to say it yet. We're just getting to study Torah for the first time today, so we say a blessing over Torah study. Okay, so let's take a look here. We are now well into Exodus, but let's turn back for a moment, or as we begin this strange conversation. What is the most important line in the Torah? This strange conversation begins by taking us back to Genesis. And I say, what is the most important line in the Torah? But that's not exactly the language that the rabbis use in the Midrash. The language that they use is klal gadol, which means the big principle, or as it's translated here, the central tenet. What is the central tenet of the Torah? And I don't know. Like, I would love to hear some of your responses to that question. Here, let's just take the first rabbinic response, and then we'll see what kind of game we're in, and we'll see if anyone else has some answers. Okay, so here's let's see, let me make this a little bigger. Okay. All right. This is from Bereshit Rabbah, the great midrash on the book of Genesis, and it starts with Ben Azai. Okay, one of the great sages of the Mishnah, Ben Azai. Ben Azai Omer, Ze Sefer Toldot Adam. This is the book of the descendants, or the legacies, or the stories of Adam, of humanity. Ze klal gadol b'Torah. This is the big principle of the Torah. Oh, and I've spaced it wrong here. Rabbi Akiva is about to disagree, and this is Rabbi Akiva. Now, the truth is, even this first statement, Ze Sefer Toldot Adam, this is the book of the descendants of Adam. Why would that be the central tenet of the Torah? Okay, so that's one question. Why this is the book of the descendants of humanity? Okay, it's sort of like a big headline kind of phrase, but is it a central tenet? In what way is it a central tenet? Okay, but just that's such a strange question that let's take the more intuitive answer and take a look at Rabbi Akiva's disagreement here. Rabbi Akiva says, "Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha." You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Ze klal gadol b'Torah. That is the central tenet of the Torah. Now, he goes on to explain, but that before he even explains, you can feel like, oh, okay. Love your neighbor as yourself. That is the central principle, the central tenet of the Torah. Now, that makes sense. That seems like that could be a whole philosophy. In fact, when a potential convert goes before Hillel and says, "Teach me the entire Torah on one foot," Hillel almost quotes this. He quotes the inverse: "Amashasna alecha al teseh l'reacha." What is hateful to you, don't do to your fellow. Right? Some version of the golden rule here is the great principle of the Torah. Okay, let's just we'll finish the thought and see what Rabbi Akiva says here in explanation. But why is this the central tenet in the Torah? It teaches that you should not say, well, since I have been disparaged, let someone else be disparaged along with me. Misery loves company, but don't bring others into your misery. Since I was cursed, let someone else be cursed along with me. No, that's not the way you should think. And Rabbi Tanhuma makes a deeper point here. In other words, Rabbi Akiva says the following, and then Rabbi Tanhuma wants to add, if you do act like that, imasita kain, know that know who it is that you are disgracing. Da lemi ata mevazeh. in the likeness of God did God make him. So, okay, so why do you need to love your neighbor as yourself? Because your neighbor is made in the image of God. And if you don't love your neighbor, you're disgracing God. Okay, that's Rabbi Tanchuma's spin on it. But let's just like stop here and consider these big central principles, these tenets that the rabbis are suggesting. And Rabbi Akiva always kind of wins that he's the most celebrated. So let's start there. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. That is the central principle of the Torah. Does that sound right to you? Does that sound right? And why would someone else be saying, no, this is the book of the generations of humanity? What is it that they're trying to do here? What are they trying to get us to understand in suggesting all these central principles? Okay, let's start with Richard.
Well, even though love your neighbor as yourself sounds like there's nothing to quibble with, it requires you to define who your neighbor is, as opposed to being all descended from Adam. There is no differentiation. You love everybody because we're all Tzelem Elokim.
Okay, good. So Richard identifies what really is a kind of a principle underlying all of these various tenets. That is the idea that we are made in the image of God. That's Rabbi Tanchuma says that's what underlies the notion that I should treat everybody the way I would want to be treated. And in a sense, Rabbi Tanchuma is therefore saying, really the central principle, it's funny that he adds it as an explanation to Rabbi Akiva's position that you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Really, it seems like he is putting forth a different verse as the ultimate verse. And the verse is that we were made in the image of God. And if that is true, then the truth is Ben Azai's position is not so far off. Zeh Sefer Toldot Adam. This is the book of the legacy or the generations of Adam. And that line here, let's see if we can find it. Zeh Sefer Toldot Adam is let's see. Just see if I can put that on screen for us. It's in Genesis chapter 5. Here it is. So you'll see Richard's really onto something here because, in fact, though it was just quoted as Zeh Sefer Toldot Adam, this is the book of the generations of humanity. In fact, if we go and we look at that line, we find it says, Zeh Sefer Toldot Adam, this is the record of Adam's line. That's Toldot is a funny word, so it's always like unclear how to translate it. But this is the record of Adam's line is Zeh Sefer Toldot Adam. When God created humankind, Bayom bro Elohim Adam bidmut Elohim asauto. In the Adam, the human, was made in the likeness of God. There it is. Dmut Elohim, the image, the likeness. So, in a way, they're all talking about the same thing. And maybe actually it's not such a debate. It's just how do we express this central principle? What is the central principle of the Torah? That we were created in the image of God, and that grants us, in the language of Levinas, infinite worth. Okay, now we like that. I understand, and now we could begin the game and say, what do you think? Is that the central principle of the Torah? So let's hear a few other responses to this idea that maybe it's love your neighbor as yourself. Maybe this is the book of the legacy as a man, or maybe it's the verse itself that says that we were created in God's image. Leah, what do you think?
I'm with Ben Azai, but a little different take on it.
Okay.
We are the descendants of Adam, who, along with Chava, made a big mistake. We had one commandment, which was don't eat from that tree. The serpent, let's call him a tube of evil, got Adam and Eve to taste of the fruit, and therefore evil is now dispersed, no longer concentrated. It is dispersed within our bodies as descendants of Adam. So we need a guidebook. We need a lot more commandments than just one. So we get the Torah to keep us from evil, to balance the Yetzer Hara, so that we can wrest the power away from the Yetzer Hara and go towards the image of God. We need a guidebook. Maybe we do need an IKEA manual. That's the Torah.
Okay. Okay. Well, now that's interesting. So first of all, like really important to notice the logic that Leah's suggesting here, which is that, well, let me actually do it in the opposite order. Let me take Leah's point first, which is sort of an important but kind of devastating one, which is that it's all nice and beautiful to say that we were created in the image of God, but we also have to remember that we are Adam. We are Adam and Chava. We are the descendants of these first people who failed, who went astray, who could not figure out how to live, whose story ends in tragedy and in sin and in curse. And so we're that too. Okay. And then Leah says, if the verse is reminding us of that, and Leah's picks along with Ben Azai, this is the book of Adam's legacy. In other words, Adam has disgraced something, and there's a legacy that we inherit, and this book will teach you how to deal with that. This is the book of coping with the legacy of Adam. I like that just as that's a beautiful interpretation, just as an explanation of the verse. Leah's given us a really nice reading there. This is the book of dealing with the legacy of Adam and Chava, because we now have to figure out how to live, and the Torah is going to show us that. I love that reading. Okay, Noah.
Yeah, I can't really pick one because they're all different tenets giving a different message of how we need to understand and bring into the practice the Torah. Each one has great moral messages, but there's so many verses in the Torah that says this is the Torah of X, Y, and Z, and this is the book of Adam. But I just really like Hazienu as the ultimate message of the Torah, which isn't even picked here as Moses' final message to the people, which has to be taken into account. But for some reason, these rabbis pick these specific verses.
Okay, good. So I want to do some of this. It's you can't discuss this debate, this midrash, without doing a little speculation of your own, right? And Noah's got some other suggestions for what the klal gadol, the central principle, the tenet that is central in the Torah. What something from Hazinu, from Moshe's great farewell speech. Any others? I want to invite debate. Like, how could it possibly be that this is the greatest principle in the Torah? Aren't there others? I can think of a couple of others. Here's one. I am the Lord your God. You shall have no other gods before me. Give me a break. That's a no-brainer, right? That's the first commandment. First thing God chose to show us. So what are these rabbis so focused on when we've already started to see that part of what they're zeroing in on is the Adamness of us all, and for good and for bad, the humanness of us all, but also the divineness of us all. But let's hear from Stan. Stan in Arizona, right?
I'm right here. Yeah, I
had the pleasure of learning with Stan in Arizona, so it's nice to see you again.
I find this to be more aspirational than anything else. I think a more realistic statement is do not do to others as you would not have them do unto you. And I find my grandfather taught me many, many years ago. He told me, he said, every word of the Torah is important. Every single word is important. And how can you find the most important? I don't know how you would do that. I think your statement, Rabbi, about I'm the Lord your God, remember the Shabbat. There's so many things. This is not one of the top 10 commandments even. So, and also I saw somebody else had entered in and said, you first have to love yourself that's a real biggie too. So I'm troubled by it, and I'm not going for it.
Good. Okay, we have a no vote on the whole idea of there being a central principle. It contradicts even some of our theological presumptions that every word of the Torah is sacred, that we wouldn't have a whole book if we could do it in one line, and every verse in the Torah is as sacred as every other. Maimonides famously says this: there's no difference between Hear, O Israel. There's another good one, right? Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. Give me that one, right? But there's no difference between that and Vitimna Haita Pilegesh Eliphaz. I forget exactly how it goes, but that Timna was the concubine of Eliphaz. That's like, seems like a random line about a sort of a person of low status, just a random and it's talking about a concubine. No, Maimonides says that's just as important as every other line in the Torah. So Stan is wondering what like, why are we trying to shave the Torah down to one central principle? That's just not true. And if it were to be one central principle, why would it be this one? This is an ethic of our, empathetic capacity, our humanity that taps us into other. Okay, that's some good stuff. How about there's some other stuff in the Torah, right? Like, what about the Lord our God is one? That's another principle. We haven't even mentioned that yet. So, okay, good. So Stan's not having it, and I invite you to join him in his opposition if you're so inclined. Robin, what do you think?
I'm with Stan in that I do think it's aspirational. I also think there's so many times in Torah when God really is bad. God does bad things, and our leaders do bad things. And so wouldn't it be ideal to be reminded that we have to care for each other and we have to care for ourselves? And because we are made in God's image, so we want to get the best qualities of God, not the worst qualities. And also, is neighbor the same as stranger, or is that a different word? I don't know myself. But if it's the same or related, then there's that connection of the stranger and how important, how many times the word stranger is mentioned and how important that is in our, in our ethic. And didn't Hillel also say the same? Wasn't Hillel on the same bandwagon? Do not love your neighbor as yourself. All the rest is commentary.
There you go. Yeah, that's right. What's hateful to you, you should not do to another. All the rest is commentary. That phrasing of Hillel's is sort of what we're dealing with. The idea that everything else could just be commentary on one principle. I mean, it's sort of a strange notion, though. There's plenty of rabbinic attempts to do this. Could the Torah be boiled down to 10 principles, 5 principles, 3 principles, 1 principle? Okay, and Robin again wonders, where is God in all of this? It seems clear that the emphasis is on l're'echa, your neighbor, your fellow, your interpersonal, the person you're in. We have this idea in our tradition of the side of our obligations that are bein adam lechavero, that are between human beings. That seems like, yeah, that's important. This religion's really concerned with it. But what about bein adam lemakom, between human beings and God? If this is the central principle of the Torah, then why do I have to keep kosher? That's not helpful to my good relationships with others. Where is God in all of this? Okay, all right. Let's take one more comment from Emily, and then we'll push forward a little bit.
My feeling is that the Lord your God is one is not as central as love your neighbor as yourself, because you don't need God to love your neighbor as yourself. In fact, you don't need God to follow any of the commandments. It's about behavior and ethics and how to live as human beings. But you can love God and hate everyone else. And I don't think that's the point of the Torah. So I think Hillel is right.
Okay. So that's a strong statement, right? Like, here I'm saying almost rhetorically, well, come on, what about God? This whole other side of the religion. And Emily says, yeah, okay. So, the religion's about God. Obviously, the religion's about God. That's what religion is about. And sure, like we're going to have obligations to God. But the essence, the idea here is that our relationship with God will inform our conduct in the world. Maybe that is the great insight of the Torah, that there's this book which comes from God is here to tell us how to treat each other. That's God's concern, and that it being God's concern makes it the central principle. So yes, we will worship God, but how will we worship God? By not hurting each other. And in that sense, it really does become the central principle. Okay, so that's great. Emily takes really seriously this idea that maybe Rabbi Akiva and others are pushing us towards not a humanistic, because it's not like God's not in the picture, but a worldly, human society focused thrust to the Torah's messaging. Great. Okay. However, the debate continues, and we just saw Ben Azai and Rabbi Akiva, very early scholars, debating whether it's this book is the descendants of Ze Sefer Toldot Adam, or whether it's Ve'ahavta l'recha kamocha, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. But there is another record of this debate, and I'm always like a little titillated when I teach it, because I'm excited to share it, because there's something odd about this version. Well, there are many odd things about this version, actually. One is that it's not clear where to find it. It appears in the introduction to a compendium of the Talmud called Ein Yaakov. Ein Yaakov is a book that takes all of the narrative sections of the Talmud, so the fun stuff, the storytelling, and leaves out all the law. Right? There are compendiums of the Talmud that take out all of the narrative and just focus on law. The Rif does that, but the Ein Yaakov is the opposite. All the stories of the Talmud, for those who like stories, and just skipping the legal sections. Okay, so that's interesting. Now, the Ein Yaakov, however, which became a very classic work of study, be like a way of keeping people who weren't so Talmudically literate, keeping them entertained as they'd read the good stuff. The Ein Yaakov has an introduction, and in the introduction, he mentions a midrash, but nobody knows where it is. Nobody knows exactly where to find it. So you start to see people quoting this midrash, but it's not in the Talmud, it's not in the midrash, there's no record of where it is except in the introduction to this other compendium. So, and likely there is some midrash out there that he saw, but we've lost it. But anyway, that's the first strange thing about this other record of the debate. The other strange thing you'll see as we move forward, because as the debate carries on, it becomes stranger and stranger. Okay, so let's take a look here. You will see the same positions that we just saw repeated. That is, you'll see Rabbi Akiva's and Rabbi, who was it? Ben Azai. Ben Azai's debate. We'll see now in the name of two other scholars, but then we will see some more opinions. So I said this is hard to find. So where did I find it? So I found a record of this debate in the writings of the Maharal of Prague. The Maharal of Prague is writing about the principle of loving your neighbor as yourself, and he cites this midrash, and he says, and you'll soon see, he says this is found only in the introduction of the Ein Yaakov. So let's take a look here. That was like that was a long introduction to one text, but it's just it's not often that you get a mysterious midrash that everybody knows, but nobody knows where it comes from. So let's take a look here at the Maharal on he's discussing loving your neighbor as yourself. And what he says is, you will find in the collection Ein Yaakov, I'm just telling you about. You will find Bechibur Ein Yaakov Bahakdamat HaKotev, in the introduction, Shematzachi Bechibur Midrash Echad. That he says he found in his collection a certain midrash, another midrash. I said another version, but all he says is a certain midrash. But it's another version of this midrash, which we don't, like I said, we don't know where it comes from. But here it is. It'll look familiar to you now. Benzoma was also a very early teacher, and he says that we have found the greatest verse. Matzino pasuk kolel yoter, the greatest, again, this language of all-encompassing principle, kolel yoter. V'hu Shema Yisrael, and it is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. Oh, there it is. That's a good one, right? That's God is one. Finally, we're mentioning some other significant verses. But Ben Nana says, and here he's the one that's channeling Rabbi Akiva. Ben Nana says, Omer Matzinu Pasuk Kolel Yoter. We found an even greater verse, an even more central or all-encompassing verse, and it is Ve'ahavta l'recha kamocha. It is love your neighbor as yourself. Okay, so now we've really got a debate. Love your neighbor as yourself, or God is one. Now, we already did some of this work. Could we synthesize them, as Emily was just doing, or do they stand in opposition? Is Ben Zoma now saying, "Oh, I want to enter a new contestant into the contest, and it's Shema Yisrael. Why have we not been talking about Hear, O Israel?" So, I could do this for a while. We could do that. It's like I said, it's just fun. What do you think is more important, Shema Yisrael or love your neighbors yourself? That's a really good question, actually. But suddenly Shimon ben Pazi comes in. Now, there's two very strange things are about to happen. One is Shimon ben Pazi's opinion, and that's really what we're going to spend the rest of our time talking about. So here's Shimon ben Pazi's opinion. It should take you, I hope, by a little bit of surprise, although not Yonatan, because Yonatan guessed this early on. He's seen it before. Shimon ben Pazi says, Matzinu pasu kolel yoter. We found an even greater verse, and it is, you shall offer the one lamb in the morning, and you shall offer the other lamb at twilight. Dun, dun, dun. That's like the ultimate anticlimax, right? Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. No. Love your neighbor as yourself. The most quotable verses in all of the Torah. And then Shimon ben Pazi comes in and says, no, it's you shall offer one lamb in the morning and you shall offer the other lamb at twilight. And if you wondered why we have been talking about this all along, it's because that verse is the one in Parsha Tetzaveh. That's the verse in this week's Torah portion that at least one of our sages claimed was the most important, the all-encompassing, the klal gadol, the central tenet in our faith, and that is, you shall offer one lamb in the morning and you shall offer the other lamb at twilight. Okay, let's give a little context, and then we're gonna try and see what we can make of this. The context here is, we have just described the building of the tabernacle. We have just described the adornment of the high priest, and now we're going to tell you what to do with all of this contraption. So now this is what you shall offer upon the altar, 2 yearling lambs each day regularly. Each day regularly meaning tamid. And in fact, this is the description of the tamid offering. What does tamid mean? Always, tamid. So every single day, always, you will always offer one lamb in the morning and one lamb at twilight, meaning in the morning and in the afternoon. This is where our concept of having morning prayers and afternoon prayers come from. And since we've just read the most important verse in the entire Torah, let's go ahead and read what else is so important. There shall be 1/10 of a measure of choice flour with 1/4 of a hin of beaten oil mixed in, and a libation of 1/4 hin of wine for one lamb. And you shall offer the other lamb at twilight, repeating with it the meal offering of the morning with its libation. an offering by fire for a pleasing odor to Hashem, a regular burnt offering through the generations at the entrance of the tent of meeting before Hashem. For there I will meet with you, and there I will speak with you, and there I will meet with the Israelites, and it shall be sanctified by my presence, and I will sanctify the tent of meeting and the altar, and I will consecrate Aaron and his sons to serve me as priests. I will abide among the Israelites, and I will be their God, and they shall know that I am Hashem, their God, who brought them out of the land of Egypt, that I might abide among them. I, Hashem, their God. Okay, there's some flourish here at the end, and God delivered us and all that, but these aren't the verses that Shimon ben Pazi said were the most important ones. This is the verse that Shimon ben Pazi said was the most important. You shall offer one lamb in the morning, and you'll offer the other lamb at twilight. So, let's just take a look at it one more time. Hear, O Israel, love your neighbor, or you shall offer one lamb in the morning and you shall offer one lamb at twilight. What do you think? What do you think? What's the most important line? What's the most important line? Now, what I'm really asking here is what's this one doing in the list? What are we talking about here? Come on. One lamb in the morning, one lamb in the evening with quarters and half heens of flour and like, give me a break. Is this how could this be the most important line in the Torah? Okay. But it's a bit rhetorical. There are answers here. So let's turn to the first one who grasped where we were headed. Yonatan, what do you think is the answer? What does this mean that we've got this third weird verse here being suggested as the most important?
And you're totally right that I cheated. I happened to study this topic a couple of years ago with Rabbi Perlman from one of the LA area Chabads. Sorry, not Rabbi Perlman, Rabbi Gordon. I think
there's a lot of LA area Chabad, so it's easy to get confused.
Rabbi Yeshua Gordon.
No, but I don't want to go too far on what the name of the rabbi was. I feel like this is a giant middle finger to the idea that there's a most important verse in the Torah. That like this is exactly what we were saying of like, pick your verse. The more obscure, the better. Now construct a midrash around why this is the most important verse in the Torah, and preferably use the rabbinic superpower of connecting everything to everything, which I think we can do. Like, if nothing else, I think it's incredible that, this, what was his name, Shimon ben Pazi, selects a mitzvah that like we can't practice anymore, right? Like in a literal sense, right? We can't offer the morning and evening sacrifice, and he's like, okay, but like you still do, right? Like, and you have to be consistent about it every single day.
Beautiful.
There's so much we can unpack about like why that's the most. He could have chosen the Pelegish verse that you were talking about earlier, right? Like this Timna woman was this guy's girlfriend, and like go figure out who she was and why she was important and what she means in this. Like, why'd she make it into the Torah? I think there's so many different verses you could do it with, and each one of them is worth doing that work with.
Okay, great. So that is a very strong read of this strange moment in the Midrash, which is that this Yonatan's interpretation is an answer to Stan's problem earlier, which is, what do you mean picking one verse in the Torah? And Yonatan says, yeah, that's the point. Is Shimon ben Pazi is saying, okay, you want to tell me any verse could be the most important. There isn't really a most important verse. It's what you focus on that becomes the most important verse. So let's take this random detail that is as important as anything else. And so we're here to make that point. The Shimon ben Pazi is here to make that point. Okay, all right. Let's see what others think. Allison.
Well, I find Yonatan's point very compelling. And so I think what I want to say is almost the opposite, but something that could sit like, in the other hand at the same time, which is like maybe any verse is equally important. And like, so, okay, what about a random verse? But maybe there is something about this verse that is tied into something really deep and really essential, but somehow has to do with like accountability with how we relate to life and death. I'm thinking, Rabbi, about the Torah that you shared in your Hadar podcast this week, Tashma. You talked about, it was so interesting. You talked about the headpiece on the Kohen Gadol. And it was interesting to me that you talked about that line, because that's the line that like sparkled up at me this week also. I've been thinking about it a lot, and the priestly vestments. So basically, like, everybody should listen to that podcast, but Rabbi Kasher drew a connection between the headpiece of the Kohen Gadol and the story of Tamar and what's his face?
Yehuda.
Jonah?
Yehuda. No,
Yehuda?
Yehuda.
Yehuda. Yeah, the story of Tamar and Yehuda, where
Here, I'm going to
basically,
put this in the chat if you want to see more.
oh, yeah, Rabbi, you could tell your own story.
No, it's okay, but just like let's just quickly.
Yeah.
So what are you thinking?
So I'm thinking, like, you drew this connection between like the sacrifices that the Kohen Gadol does and like taking accountability for our sins, because you basically drew two different connection points in the Torah between like the priestly vestments and Yehuda taking accountability for something that only he and Tamar knew, but like really taking ownership of his own actions, and the story of Cain, like that original like horrible sin where like Cain kills his own brother and God like puts a mark on Cain's forehead. And
Right.
there's something about like that we will be a nation of priests, that like we need to be accountable to our own actions and like lift up the sanctity of life, and all of that is like baked into the priest doing these two sacrifices twice a day with lambs.
Okay, great. Okay, so perfect. So Allison says that she is a little hesitant now because she's swayed by Yonatan's answer, which is that it's all equal. But actually, Allison perseveres and gives us really the opposite position, which is that it's not all random, that this verse is important. It's critically important because this is the first expression of the sacrificial system, which will be there to atone for our sins. What could be more important than the fact that God has given us a mechanism to grapple with what is the legacy of Adam? That we sinned and that we've always been sinning. And now we have some mechanism for release. The sacrifices may not seem all that relevant to us, but boy, that was big news back in the day, that you had some chance of unburdening yourself. And maybe this verse in Parsha Tetzaveh is the first expression of the notion that there will be relief, there will be expiation for these things that you're carrying around. That does seem important. That's like the whole book of Leviticus. So maybe, this opinion is, yeah, that's the most important thing, is that there will be that you will find forgiveness, right? I mean, there are surely other religions that have put the forgiveness of sin right at the top of their list of virtues, right? So why not us? Okay, great. Andrea Shapiro.
I have almost a question rather than an answer. The early rabbis didn't base what became our practice of prayer on anything at all, really. So they tried to base it on when there were sacrifices in the temple. And I'm wondering if that's not hearkening back to that, to all these things that we've developed in rabbinic Judaism really has its heart in the Tanakh, in the Torah, and that's why this is the most important.
That's another great answer, which is the rabbis are living in a world of destruction. They are living in a world of loss. They live in the aftermath of the destruction of the temple, and they're trying to grapple with that. And they are coming up with new forms of religious living, like studying the Torah, that have endured remarkably well, but they were still clinging to the vision of the once majestic temple that offered exactly what we're saying, expiation from sin, but also a connection to God. And the rabbis were not trying to leave that behind. Sometimes we characterize the rabbis as like, they're not interested in temple stuff. They were happy to leave it, but they cared. They cared about that old religion and they mourned its loss. And so what's the most important thing you would expect a rabbi to say is the beloved temple, the long lost temple. Yeah. Okay. That's also a good answer. Bob Numeroff, good to see you. It's been a while. Nice to see you. I'll ask you to unmute. Yeah, go for it.
So, yeah, so I don't necessarily think that this is the most critical verse, but what does resonate with me with this verse is the notion of doing something in the morning. So after you wake up, and doing something at twilight, probably right before you're going to sleep. So this notion of you're living your whole day from beginning to end in accordance with the laws of the Torah.
Okay, good. I'm glad someone said that. I was hoping someone would say something like this, because I think that's also, look, it's called the Korban Tamid, the always offering, the everyday offering, and it's certainly this is certainly a verse that could be representing the position that what matters most is the everyday, regular, routine practice of service to God. Not the highlights, not the standing at Mount Sinai, not your favorite verse in the Torah. No, the one that actually maybe isn't so glamorous, but you do it every single day. And that's the essence of the Torah, is not that you're going to perform these majestic, noble acts, but that you'll live your whole life in this extremely disciplined way. And there's something about the regularity, the routine. This is a classic Jewish voice. Yeshayahu Leibovitz, I think of when I think of this voice, that it's like not about the exaltation of the religious ecstasy. It's about the regular halachic, right? Like the observance to the law and the almost like the holy in the mundane. That's the great insight of this religion, right? And that might be, if you want to say that maybe that's mad. Maybe this is the central principle in the Torah. I see 3 hands up, and I'm going to see if I can take them all. But I want to, just in case I lose this, I want to give you one other piece of this, the last piece of this midrash, which is just so one of the coolest. I don't even know how to account for this. One of the coolest moments in midrash, though. Again, I'm not sure where this midrash exactly comes from. But we saw those 3 positions. We're not going to get a new position here, but we are going to get a vote a vote in favor of one of these positions, and the vote comes in the voice of Rabbi Anonymous. I kid you not. The word for anonymous in rabbinic Hebrew is ploni. Ploni. Ploni is just sort of like John Doe. So listen as Rabbi Ploni comes in, which is very, very unusual. Amad Rabbi Ploni, and you can see it's unusual because he stood up. Rabbi Anonymous stood up. Now, what does that even mean? Rabbi Anonymous stood up and said, "We rule like Ben Pazi," this last opinion, as if there was some ruling that needed to be made, right? As if like this is a question that had to be decided, has real halacha. But we rule like halacha ka Ben Pazi. The law is like Ben Pazi, diktiv, and his justification, this is also weird, as it is written, all that I display to you, the design of the tabernacle. Now what? Okay, so we've already spent some time puzzling over this, but this is also a puzzle. This is more tabernacle language. In fact, I'll give it to you. And let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them, exactly as I show you the pattern of the tabernacle and all of its furnishings, so you shall make it. So now, what? That is the justification for this idea being the right of idea. And Rabbi Anonymous says it. Now, I threw so much at you there in the last 5 minutes of class. I'm not sure I know what to do with it, but I'm going to turn to the hands that we have up. If you've got some understanding of what Rabbi Anonymous is doing here, I welcome your thoughts. But let's hear from Noah, who's had his hand up for a while.
Yeah, first on Rav Plony, who's taking the Vasuli Mikdash, that he's trying to find a way to make it so that we have something to hold on to that we can physically build. I don't really like that one. More often, I like Adam ki yakriv mikem korban ladonai, that a person who's bringing a sacrifice to the Lord has to bring something from themselves. That, I think, is essence of the religion, that we can't do it just, we have to bring something of ourselves to the table.
Okay, I love this. First of all, it's cool to have Noah making his point with a huge golden arrow in his background. So that's cool too. But Noah's still playing the game. He's still saying, I'm not sure if this verse really expresses. If I wanted a verse that really expressed I mean, this is just, it's so beautiful the way Noah's like verse would fit right into this. You know, he's got a verse that synthesizes a lot. Adam ki yakriv mikem. So Adam bringing a sacrifice. Oh, like maybe there's a better verse. And I just love that work of like, well, once we're in the game of what is the ultimate verse, well, surely everybody's got to have an entry. Okay, let's hear from Hannah Chussid.
This going back to just before this new piece about regulation, the regulated life, a day that's focused on living in a regulated way. But the specific of offering a lamb doesn't say your choice of a meal offering or the different or kinds of offerings. What a lamb offering is your wealth, your productivity, your accomplishment. And so to offer that daily and twice daily, the most you could offer is a lamb, is to say your accomplishments are not your own, your achievements don't belong to you, is a management of what in our modern world we would call ego, right? To remember every day when you wake up and go to sleep that, I mean, it's just an expansion of that our life is to be dedicated to a higher way to God, a higher order, but specifically separating it from, I have to give up the fruits of my labor regularly because they're not mine.
Okay, that's great. I mean, we've talked about sacrifice, but we've taken it seriously, but we've talked about it mostly in our favor, right? Sacrifice as the expiation of sin. What a relief that we have the expiation of sin. But Hannah is pointing out the other major side of that coin, the in some ways most basic purpose of sacrifice, which is that you sacrifice something. You give something to God, you give of yourself. And maybe that's like the ultimate principle in the Torah, is that we're willing to sacrifice. We're willing to make this world not about us. We're willing to give over something to God, to another person. But the idea that we're actually being asked to every single day, not just perform a routinized action, right? We consider that message, but also to perform a real act of giving up. Every single day to give up something. That's a powerful orientation. And once we begin to be able to give up our possessions, our prized possessions, then we enter into a life of service. And that might be the ultimate principle in the Torah. Now, we're going to have to end, and I'm sorry to Diana, who won't be able to reach, but this is like, you can see that this game actually forces us to do some important work, which is to think, what is this all about? And while I am ultimately probably with Stan, here, and Yonatan, that, you know, it's hard to pick one. That part of the brilliance of this tradition is that there are 613 commandments, and there are 5 books, and there are many klalim, great principles in the Torah. It does show you how, when we really stop and think about it, not only can all of the sections of the Torah be interesting to read, but every verse in the Torah offers the possibility for thinking about the most important things. And we have the opportunity here with this debate, but, you know, even here in Parsha Tetzaveh, to think about, you know, a line that seems so detail-oriented, so nitty-gritty, how it might be pointing us to some essential principle, some deep, important, maybe all-encompassing principle. And I would suggest that maybe we should bring that eye, now that we've trained it a little bit, to all of our reading of the Torah, to every verse that we come across in the Torah. How might this be the most important principle? What essential thing might this be teaching me, that if I don't stop and pay attention, I'll just breeze by, thinking of it as just another detail? So thanks, everybody, for great work. Wishing you a beautiful rest of your week and a Shabbat Shalom.